In Frostfang Pack, slaves were forbidden to cry during winter because frozen tears were considered a waste of water. Kimberly learned that rule before she learned her own birthday. She learned it the way she learned every rule in that pack, through cold, through hunger, through the back of someone's hand. By the time she was 20, she no longer needed the rule. Her body had simply stopped producing tears at all. Some said her wolf had died inside her. Others said she never had one. Kimberly herself no longer wondered which was true. She only knew that the snow did not care either way, and neither did the alpha who owned her chains. What she did not know was that 12 wolves were already dying in the mountains above her. What she would not understand, until it was far too late to run, was exactly what she was about to find beneath the snow, and exactly what it would cost her the moment she chose not to walk away. Before we step into that snow together, welcome to our growing family of story lovers. If you enjoy emotional werewolf romances filled with mystery, destiny, and unforgettable alpha kings, we'd love to have you with us. Please like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We read every single comment, and if we could, we'd send each of you a warm hug across the miles. Now, dim the lights, because what Kimberly finds beneath that snow is about to change everything she believes about who she is. Snow fell over Frostfang Pack, the way ash falls over a battlefield. Slow, gray, indifferent to who it buried. Kimberly crossed the courtyard with 2 buckets of water hanging from a yoke across her shoulders, her arms shaking from the cold and the weight. Her cloak was wool gone thin as paper, patched so many times it was more thread than cloth. Beneath it, her wrists carried the dull red marks of chains worn since dawn. Inside the great hall, firelight spilled gold across the windows. She could hear the laughter, the clatter of pewter cups, the low growl of music played on a borrowed harp, roasted meat, mulled wine, warmth she would never be allowed to stand near. Lorena Voss appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a wolf fur cloak, the pelt of a creature her own pack had likely killed for sport. She smiled the way wolves smile at something too weak to fight back. "Don't die before sunset," Lorena said. "Father wants the floors clean for the feast." The hall laughed. Kimberly lowered her eyes, not from shame, but because she had learned long ago that looking up only invited more cruelty. Silence was armor. She wore it well. She had not always worn chains. 15 years ago she had been a child of rank, an Omega born into a family with land, and a name people said aloud with respect. Then her parents were accused of treason against the Noctis crown, dragged from their home in the night, and executed before the pack had even finished its breakfast. Kimberly remembered none of the details. She remembered only the cold floor she had been left on, and the way the new alpha, Marek Voss, had looked down at her and decided that a traitor's daughter belonged with the livestock. Since that morning she had scrubbed blood from stone, hauled water through every season, and slept on straw beside animals who, unlike the people above her, never once raised a hand against her. She had never shifted, not once, in 15 years. The pack called her wolfless, a word spat more than spoken, a word that excused every cruelty visited upon her. No one questioned it. No one wondered why a girl born to an Omega bloodline had never once felt her wolf stir beneath her skin. No one but Kimberly herself, in the deepest part of the night, when the ache beneath her ribs felt less like absence and more like something locked away. She did not know about the wolfsbane ground fine into the slave's gruel, a dose too small to kill but large enough to smother. She did not know about the old curse laid upon her bloodline the night her parents died, a moon binding woven by someone who understood exactly what they were trying to bury. She knew only the ache and the silence and the snow. That evening, as the feast roared on without her, Alpha Marek Voss called her before him. He did not look at her so much as through her, the way a man looks through a tool he intends to use once more before discarding. "The healer needs moonroot," he said. "It grows past the high ridge. Bring back enough for the hounds before they catch the winter cough. Kimberly understood the order for what it was. Everyone did. The blizzard rolling down from the mountains had already buried 3 hunting parties that week. No one survived the high ridge in that kind of storm. This was not an errand. It was an execution, dressed in the language of chores. She did not argue. Arguing had never once changed anything in 15 years. She only asked, quietly, "Will there be a fire to come back to?" Marek did not answer. He simply turned back to his feast, and that silence was answer enough. Lorena lingered by the door a moment longer than the others, watching Kimberly disappear into the dark with an expression that was not quite satisfaction and not quite doubt. "Send Garrick and 2 men after her at first light," she told her father's steward, low enough that only he could hear. "Father wants her body found, before the healer starts asking why his moon root never came back with her. A slave who simply vanishes invites questions. A slave who is seen to have died obeying does not. It was not mercy that sent hunters into the mountains 4 days later. It was the bookkeeping of cruelty, the need for Frostfang's cruelty to look, on paper, like duty rather than murder. The mountain swallowed her within the hour. Wind screamed through the passes loud enough to drown her own breathing. Snow came at her sideways, stinging her face raw, finding every gap in her ruined cloak. She climbed, because stopping meant dying, and some stubborn, furious part of her, the part that had survived 15 years of Frostfang Pack, refused to let the mountain win so easily. By the time the light began to fail, her legs had gone numb to the knee. She no longer felt her hands. She told herself this was simply the body's mercy, numbing itself before the end. And she kept walking anyway, because some instinct older than her own despair would not let her lie down. That was when she heard it. Not a howl, not the killing snarl of a hunting wolf, a whimper, small and pain-soaked, swallowed almost instantly by the wind. She should have run. Every rule of survival told her to run. Instead, she turned toward the sound, because the part of her that still ached to be useful to someone, anyone, had never quite died, no matter how hard Frostfang tried to kill it. She found the first wolf half buried beneath a drift, a great grey body shaking with cold and blood loss, a wound at its shoulder packed with something silver that caught what little light remained. She brushed the snow away with hands she could no longer feel. The wolf's eyes opened, golden and glassy with pain, and did not snap at her. It only watched. She found a second wolf 10 feet on, then a third. By the time the light failed completely, she had counted 12 enormous wolves scattered across the ridge, like fallen statues, every one of them wounded, every one of them too weak to do more than breathe. No ordinary wolf survived wounds packed with silver. No ordinary wolf lay this still, watching a stranger with eyes too aware, too patient, too human. Kimberly knelt in the snow beside the largest of them, a black wolf, whose wound bled darker than the others, whose breath came in slow, deliberate pulls, as if even dying he was disciplining himself into control. She did not know his name. She did not know he had one beyond the title carved into every coin in the kingdom. She only knew that no one had ever come back for her, not once, not in 15 years, and that she could not now turn her back on 12 creatures who needed exactly the thing she had spent her whole life being denied. "No one came back for me," she whispered into the wind, her voice cracking from cold and something rawer than cold. "So I will come back for you." She found an old hunter's cabin half collapsed beneath snow, a quarter-mile down the ridge. It took the rest of the night and every ounce of strength left in her starved body to drag, coax, and half-carry 12 wolves through drifting snow into its shelter, one at a time, her arms screaming, her breath tearing at her throat. By the time the last wolf, the black one, lay beside the dying fire she'd managed to build from broken shutters, dawn was already bleeding grey across the sky. She did not know that the black wolf had not let his eyes close once during the entire night. He had watched every trip she made into the storm. He had watched her return each time, bleeding from the wind, refusing to stop, refusing to choose her own survival over theirs. He did not know, yet, what that meant. She did not know, yet, who he was. The cabin held heat the way a cupped hand holds water, barely, and only with constant attention. Kimberly fed the fire with whatever wood she could find, melted snow for water, and used strips torn from her own cloak to bind wounds packed with silver that burned her fingers when she touched them. She noticed, on the second day, that the wolves did not behave like wolves. They took turns at the door, one always alert while the others rested, rotating without a single sound passing between them. When she moved near the weakest of them, the others watched her with an attention too calculated to be instinct. They were guarding each other. They were guarding her. The black wolf never left her side. When she slept, exhausted past the point of fear, he lay across the threshold, his body between her and the door. When the wind howled loud enough to sound like something prowling outside, his ears rose and his eyes opened, gold and sharp, before she had even registered the sound herself. He watched her hands when she cleaned his wound. He watched her face when exhaustion finally broke her composure, and her eyes, dry for 15 years, burned with something she refused to call tears. She spoke to him sometimes, in the long hours when the others slept, and the silence pressed too heavy to bear alone. "You're not just an animal, are you?" she said once, winding fresh cloth around his foreleg. "I've cleaned hound wounds my whole life. None of them ever looked at me like they understood what I was saying." He huffed, low in his chest, almost like a laugh, and pressed his great head briefly against her hand before pulling away, as if he had allowed himself something he should not have. She did not know that Lucien Noctis, Alpha King of the Moon Citadel, had not been touched with simple kindness in longer than he could remember. Crowns did not invite gentle hands. Power did not invite trust. He had forgotten, somewhere in the long, grinding years of rule, what it felt like to be cared for without calculation behind it. He had also not forgotten, not for one moment, the sensation that struck him the instant Kimberly's bare hand had first touched his wound in the snow, a warmth that did not belong to fire, a pull beneath his ribs he had read about only in old texts his grandmother used to recite, the kind of pull that happened exactly once in a wolf's life, if it happened at all. He could not speak. The silver curse that had stripped his shift away kept his throat as wolf-shaped as the rest of him. He could not tell her what she was to him. He could only stay close and watch and let his body do what words could not. On the fourth night, hunters found their trail. The knock came just past midnight. 3 heavy raps that were not a knock at all but a demand. Kimberly's whole body went cold, in a way the blizzard had never managed. She knew that knock. She had heard it before outside other cabins, other huts, the homes of slaves who had displeased Frostfang in one way or another. It was the sound of men who had already decided the outcome before they arrived. "Open up!" a voice called, rough with cold and impatience. "We tracked a slave girl out here. Pack property doesn't run." Kimberly's hand went instinctively toward the wolves, as if her body understood something her mind had not yet caught up to. That these 11 battered creatures, and the one who never left her side, were, in this moment, the only thing standing between her and whatever Frostfang intended to do to a slave who had dared to survive. The door splintered inward on the second blow. What happened next, Kimberly would replay for the rest of her life, though she would never fully understand it until later. The black wolf rose. He should not have been able to. His wound had barely begun to close, his body still weak from blood loss and cold. He rose anyway, every motion slow and deliberate, his head low, his eyes burning gold in the firelight, and he placed himself, bleeding and exhausted, directly between Kimberly and 3 armed hunters. He did not snarl. He did not need to. There was something in his stillness, something ancient and absolute. that made even seasoned trackers take a step backward, without quite understanding why their bodies had decided retreat was wise. The other 11 wolves rose behind him, one by one, forming a wall of wounded, silent, unbreakable will. "That's not a normal wolf," one hunter muttered, already backing toward the broken door. "Nothing about tonight is normal," another answered, and they fled into the storm, rather than test whatever instinct screamed at them to run. Kimberly stood frozen in the wreckage of the doorway, long after the hunter's footsteps had faded into the wind. For the first time in 15 years, something with the power to protect her had chosen to do exactly that, without being asked, without expecting anything in return. She knelt beside the black wolf as his legs finally gave out from the effort, his head coming to rest heavily against her knee. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her hands shaking as she pressed cloth back over wounds that had reopened. "You could have let them take me. It would have been easier on you." He looked up at her, gold eyes dimmed with exhaustion, but still, impossibly, soft, and she understood without words that easier had never once been the question for him. By the end of the first week, something Kimberly could not explain had begun happening beneath her hands. The silver wounds, the ones that should have festered and poisoned slowly outward, the way silver always did to a wolf's body, were closing faster than wounds had any right to close. She noticed it first, on the smallest of the 11 guards, a wound that had blackened at the edges, suddenly pinking with healthy color after she had simply held her palm against it through a long, restless night. She did not understand what she was doing. She only knew her hands had always felt warm against wounds, ever since she was a child, long before Frostfang stripped that gift of meaning from her, along with everything else. What Kimberly did not know, and what none of the 11 guards dared explain while still trapped in wolf form, was that she carried blood from the forgotten Vale Frost line, an old bloodline of healers whose touch alone could slow the corruption of cursed silver. It was not magic, not in the way the old stories told it. It was older than magic, sacred moonblood passed down through women the kingdom had long since forgotten existed. Only someone of that bloodline could weaken the curse that bound 12 wolves to their wolf shape. Only someone like Kimberly. She spent her nights cleaning wounds and her days hauling snow for water, and her in-between hours simply sitting beside the black wolf, talking to him the way she had never been allowed to talk to anyone in 15 years, about small things, about the way the light looked through frost on the windows, about a childhood she barely remembered, and missed anyway. She did not know he understood every word. She did not know he would remember every word, long after his voice returned to him. "I used to have a mother," she told him one evening, her fingers absently working through the fur at his neck, as if she had forgotten, just for a moment, that he was anything other than a friend who could not answer back. "I don't remember her face anymore, just her hands. She used to braid my hair before the fires went out for the night." The wolf made a low sound, something between a growl and a sigh, and pressed closer against her side. "They told me my parents were traitors," she continued, quieter now. "I don't know if I believe that anymore. I don't know what I believe. I just know that whoever decided I deserved this life was wrong about something. He wished, more than he had wished for anything in his long, burdened reign, that he could simply say the 2 words sitting heaviest on his silenced tongue. They lied. The curse broke on the 9th morning, though none of them understood why until later, when the truth of the assassination unraveled fully. Kimberly woke to a sound she had never heard inside that cabin before, the low groan of a man's voice instead of a wolf's whimper. She sat up fast, heart hammering, and found the space where the black wolf always slept, now occupied by something else entirely. A man knelt where the wolf had been, broad-shouldered and scarred, dark hair falling across a face carved with exhaustion, and something that looked, impossibly, like relief. Golden eyes, the same eyes that had watched over her every night for 9 days, found hers across the dim cabin. Faint markings, burned gold and silver into his collarbone, marked him as something far beyond an ordinary wolf. "You," she breathed, scrambling backward despite herself. "You were the wolf, the black one." "I am," he said, and his voice, rough from disuse, was somehow exactly as steady and careful as his eyes had always been. "Lucien Noctis, King of the Moon Citadel." The words landed wrong in the small cabin, too large for the space, too large for the girl in patched wool, kneeling across from him, with chain marks still raw on her wrists. "The Alpha King," she repeated, disbelief sharp in her voice. "I've been talking to the Alpha King about my mother's hands for 9 days. You've been talking to a man who has heard more honesty from you in 9 days than from his entire court in 9 years, Lucien said, and something in the gentleness of it nearly undid her composure entirely. He told her, slowly, what little he understood. An assassination attempt during a winter hunt, enchanted silver and moon-binding chains, designed to trap him and his royal shadow guard in wolf form permanently. The work of someone who understood the old curses far too well for a common enemy. He told her that her touch, her blood, had done what no healer in the Moon Citadel had managed. He did not yet tell her the rest. The truth his wolf had known from the very first night. The recognition that had struck him the instant her bare hand touched his wound in the snow. He was not ready to risk what little trust he had earned by naming it too soon. Kimberly, for her part, watched him with the wary calculation of someone who had been taught, brutally and repeatedly, that powerful men only ever wore prettier chains. "I don't trust kings," she said quietly. "Every powerful person I've ever met has used me for something. I don't know why you'd be different." "I don't expect you to trust me yet," Lucien said. "I only ask that you let me try to deserve it." The 11 shadow guards shifted back over the following days, one by one, the cabin filling with men who owed Kimberly their lives and did not pretend otherwise. Cassian Rook, the eldest of them, broad and weathered with a grin that seemed permanently affixed to his face, despite everything, took to teasing the king with the easy familiarity of someone who had survived 3 wars beside him. "Your Majesty," he said one evening, watching Lucien drink the bitter herbal broth Kimberly insisted on for his lingering wound fever. "I have survived 3 wars, and one particularly memorable encounter with a frost giant, but I have never once seen anyone successfully order you to drink anything you didn't want." He obeyed. Another guard added solemnly. Lucien, despite himself, allowed a rare smile to surface, and Kimberly found herself, despite every wall she had built over 15 years, smiling back at the warmth filling that small ruined cabin, like something she had never been permitted to feel before. That warmth deepened in quieter moments too. The nights remained brutally cold, the fire never quite enough against a mountain blizzard that refused to break. More than once, survival demanded they sit close enough to share heat, Lucien's broad shoulder against her smaller frame, his presence a furnace she found herself leaning into before she had decided to allow it. She told herself it was only the cold. She told herself the way her pulse rose when his hand brushed hers, reaching for the same cup, the way her breath caught when his gold eyes lingered a moment too long on her face by firelight, the way some traitorous, hungry part of her ached toward him, even as the rest of her remained braced for betrayal. All of it was only the cold, too. It was not only the cold. One night, as wind screamed against the shutters and the others slept in exhausted heaps near the dying fire, Lucien spoke quietly into the dark beside her. "You whispered to me," he said, "every night, while you believed I was only a wolf, about your mother's hands, about the way frost looks through windows, about wanting, just once, to matter to someone." Kimberly's breath caught. "You remember all of that?" "I remember every word," he said, and the rawness in his voice told her he meant it absolutely. "I have never been spoken to with that kind of honesty in my entire life. Not as a prince, not as a king. Only as a wolf you believed could not understand you, and could not betray what you said. Her eyes burned, the old dryness she had carried for 15 years, cracking at last, under the weight of being truly seen. I didn't know you could hear me. I heard every word, he said, and I have wanted, every single day since, to tell you that no one who speaks to a wounded animal with that much tenderness deserves the life that was forced upon you. His hand found hers in the dark, slow, deliberate, an offering rather than a claim. She did not pull away. Their faces drew closer in the firelight, breath mingling, the ache between them finally given room to exist without the disguise of survival or necessity. His thumb traced the chain marks on her wrist with something achingly gentle, as if he could heal them through touch alone. Kimberly, he murmured, her name sitting in his mouth like something sacred. A guard's cough from across the cabin broke the moment before their lips could meet, and Lucien pulled back with visible restraint, his gold eyes dark with banked want. Not like this, he said softly. Not stolen in a moment we might regret rushing. When I kiss you, I want you certain of every reason why. The blizzard broke on the 12th day, and with it came the truth Lucien had feared since the first night of the ambush. A rider from the Moon Citadel, half frozen and barely coherent, reached the cabin with news that confirmed what Lucien's instincts had whispered all along. The assassination had not come from some rival pack hungry for territory. It had come from within his own royal council, from Edrin Caldris, an advisor Lucien had trusted since boyhood, a man who had stood at his father's side before standing at his. He sold the ambush location to whoever paid highest, the rider reported, voice shaking. We found correspondence. He intends to seize the regency the moment word spreads that you are dead, Your Majesty. Lucien's jaw tightened with a fury Kimberly had not yet seen in him, cold and absolute. The kingdom has been rotting from the inside, and I called the rot my friend. What happens now? Kimberly asked. Now, Lucien said, turning to her with something that mixed grief and resolve in equal measure. We return to the Citadel, and I correct every lie that man has told in my name, beginning with the lie that decided you deserved chains. Kimberly's chest tightened at the thought of Frostfang Pack, of Marek Voss's contemptuous gaze, of Lorena's careless cruelty. They'll say I'm nothing, a wolfless slave who ran instead of dying like she was supposed to. They will say nothing, Lucien said, because 11 members of my shadow guard and I will stand beside you and tell the truth instead. The return to Frostfang Pack drew every eye in the territory. 12 riders, the Alpha King himself among them, descended on a pack that had spent 2 weeks assuming their missing slave girl had simply frozen and died as intended. Marek Voss met them in the courtyard, with the practiced humility of a man scrambling to understand what was happening before it crushed him. Your Majesty, he stammered, we did not know. We would never have... You sent a girl with healer's blood into a blizzard expecting her to die, Lucien said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard with the weight of absolute authority. Why was the woman who saved her king wearing slave chains in the first place? The question landed like a blade. No one in the courtyard moved. Cassian Rook stepped forward, the other 10 guards beside him, and one by one they testified, plainly and without embellishment, to exactly what Kimberly had done, how she had found them dying in the snow, how she had dragged 12 wounded bodies through a storm that should have killed her 3 times over, how she had healed wounds no ordinary touch could close, asking nothing in return, not even her freedom. The pack listened in a silence that slowly curdled into shame. Whispers spread among the gathered villagers, the truth of 15 years unraveling in minutes. The wolfless slave girl had healing blood older than the pack's own bloodline. The traitor's daughter had saved the kingdom. Lorena Voss, watching from the doorway where she had once told Kimberly not to die before sunset, said nothing at all. Lucien did not order punishment. He did not need to. He simply removed Kimberly's slave collar himself, his fingers careful and deliberate against skin that had worn that mark for 15 years, and placed the broken collar into her own hands. "You decide what becomes of this," he said quietly, for her ears alone. Kimberly looked at the collar, at the chain that had defined every single day of her remembered life, and walked to the courtyard's bonfire without a word. She threw it into the flames and watched it twist and blacken until it was nothing at all. Only then did the kingdom's reckoning truly begin. Edrin Caldris's betrayal collapsed within a fortnight of Lucien's return to the Moon Citadel. Confronted with the rider's evidence and the unified testimony of the Shadow Guard, the council advisor made one final, desperate attempt at violence, cornering Lucien in the Citadel's western hall, with blades meant to finish what the silver ambush had failed to do. It was Kimberly's wolf, awakened at last after 15 years of suppression, that answered the threat. She had not sought the awakening for vengeance. She had sought it only because some fierce, unshakable instinct refused to let her lose the first person who had ever chosen her freely, without condition, without cruelty. Her wolf rose from beneath 15 years of wolfsbane and curse-bound silence, pale silver-grey and trembling with newness, and placed itself between Lucien and the blade meant for his heart, with the same fearless certainty he had once shown her in a ruined cabin. Edrin Caldris did not survive his own treachery. The Royal Council did not survive the scandal either, purged and rebuilt from advisors who had stood, unflinching, on the right side of the truth. In the weeks that followed, the Moon Citadel buzzed with a story that traveled faster than any royal decree. The Alpha King had been saved twice over by a girl the world had called wolfless, worthless, nothing. Lucien found Kimberly at last, on a quiet evening in the Citadel's frost-touched garden. The same gold eyes that had watched over her through a blizzard, now watching her beneath a different kind of moonlight entirely. "I told you once that I would earn your trust rather than demand it," he said. "I would like to ask you something now, only if you believe I have." Kimberly searched his face, the face she had first known only as a wolf's patient eyes, and felt the old armor she had worn for 15 years finally, fully, set itself down. "You have," she said simply. He did not offer her a crown first. He offered her his hand, the way he had in the dark of that cabin, an offering rather than a claim, and when she took it, he drew her close at last, his mouth meeting hers, slow and certain, and aching, with everything 9 days of silence had forced him to feel without saying. It was not the kiss of a king claiming what he wanted. It was the kiss of a man who had watched a girl in patched wool save 12 dying strangers in a blizzard, and decided, somewhere in that long freezing night, that he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that kind of courage. Kimberly became queen not because Lucien Noctis gave her a throne, but because she had already, long before any crown touched her head, proven herself a ruler of the only kingdom that ever truly mattered. The choice to be kind, in a world that had given her every reason not to be. The kingdom of Varin remembers her still, in the old stories told beside winter fires, as the slave who saved 12 wounded wolves in a blizzard, never knowing that one of them wasn't just a wolf at all, but the very king she would one day stand beside, free, chosen, and finally, fully, home.